The late afternoon sun was warm on the boy's neck. He was 11 years old, a quiet kid who liked being outside more than inside. His family's house sat on the edge of a wide, open land, where the grass turned from green to gold and rolled on for what felt like forever. Today, he was walking a familiar path, checking the little wire traps his father had shown him how to set for rabbits. It wasn't for sport. It was to help put food on the table. He took the job seriously, moving carefully through the dry brush and scattered cottonwood trees. That's when he saw her. He stopped in his tracks, his hand tightening on the stick he was carrying. Under the thin shade of a big, old tree stood an old woman. She was very still, like a statue, just looking out across the field. She wasn't dressed for walking out here. She wore a long, simple dress the color of dust, and over her shoulders was a thin, faded shawl. In her hands, she held a small bundle of plants. The boy felt a little ping of surprise. Not many people came out this way, especially not someone her age. For a minute, he just watched. Maybe she was supposed to be here. But something about the way she stood, so still and a little lost, told him otherwise. He thought about slipping away, not bothering a stranger. But his mother's voice was in his head, clear as anything. If you see someone who might need help, you go and ask. That's just being a person. He swallowed his shyness and took a few steps forward. The dry grass crunched under his sneakers. She turned her head slowly. Her face was lined and weathered, like the bark of the old tree she stood under. But her eyes were dark and sharp, even though they looked a little cloudy. Right now, they looked worried. "Ma'am?" The boy said, his voice coming out softer than he wanted. "Are you okay?" The woman looked at him, not with surprise, but with a kind of tired relief. She didn't smile, but her face softened. "I think," she said, her voice low and gravelly, like stones rubbing together, "I have walked too far. The land looks different today. Where are you trying to go?" The boy asked, taking another step closer. He kept a polite distance. She lifted her hand with the plants. "I came to gather this sage for my grandson. Today is important for him." She looked around, a faint confusion in her eyes. "I know these hills. I have known them since I was younger than you. But the new fences, they cut the land in new shapes. The path back to the road is hiding from me." The boy looked where she pointed. He knew those fences. Ranchers had put them up last year. He could see how they could turn a familiar walk into a puzzle. He didn't know anything about sage or naming ceremonies, but he understood being lost. He felt a tightness in his chest for her. She was so old, and the sun was still strong. "My house is just over that hill," he said, pointing the opposite way. "It's not far. My mom is home. She can call someone for you or give you some water." The old woman studied his face. He waited, trying to look friendly and sure. After a moment, she gave a single, slow nod. "That is a good thought," she said. He didn't offer his hand, worried that might be too forward, but he moved to her side and started walking very slowly, matching his small steps to her slow, careful ones. "We can go this way," he said. "The ground is more flat." They walked in silence for a bit. The only sounds were the buzz of insects, the whisper of their feet through the grass, and the distant cry of a hawk. The boy watched the ground ahead of her, pointing out a hidden rock or a dip in the earth. "Watch your step here," he'd say quietly. As they walked, the woman spoke again. "You live on this land?" "Yes, ma'am," the boy said. "My dad runs some cattle." "Not many." "It is good land," she said, more to herself than to him. "It remembers many stories." She didn't explain, and he didn't ask. Her words felt heavy, like they meant more than they sounded. It took maybe 15 minutes to crest the hill, and there below was his house, a simple white home with a big porch. Seeing it, the boy felt a rush of relief. His mother was in the yard, hanging laundry on the line. She looked up, saw the two of them coming, and froze for a second, her hands full of a wet shirt. Then she quickly pinned the shirt and started walking toward them, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Mom," the boy called out as they got closer. This lady got turned around. "She's lost." His mother's face was full of concern. She hurried forward. "Oh, goodness. Come in. Come right in. Let's get you sitting down." Her voice was warm and practical. Inside the cool kitchen, his mother pulled out a chair at the old wooden table for the woman and fetched a glass of cold water. The woman drank slowly, gratefully. The boy stood near the doorway, feeling both responsible and suddenly a little awkward in his own home. His mother asked gentle questions. The woman's name was Winona. She lived in a community on the nearby reservation. Her family would be worried. While Winona rested, the boy's mother found the number for the tribal community office and made a call. She spoke softly, explaining the situation. They said a family member would come right away. While they waited, his mother made a simple sandwich. Winona ate a little, her strength seeming to return. The boy sat at the other end of the table, listening. His mother and Winona talked about the dry weather, about the cattle, about ordinary things. But the boy could feel something bigger in the room, a kind of quiet importance. Finally, a dusty pickup truck pulled into the yard. A man and a younger woman, looking anxious, got out. They came to the door. When the younger woman saw Winona, her face crumpled with relief. "Unknew," she said, rushing in and kneeling by her chair. The man nodded gravely to the boy's mother, thanking her as Winona stood to leave. Leaning on her granddaughter's arm, she paused in front of the boy. She placed a light, dry hand on his shoulder. Her eyes found his, and the worry from before was gone. Now they were deep and calm and certain. "You have a good heart," she said, and the words felt solid, like she was handing him a stone. "You saw a person who needed help, and you did not look away. I will not forget this." Then she was gone, helped into the truck, which turned and disappeared down the long gravel drive in a cloud of dust. The boy stood on the porch with his mother, the old woman's hand still feeling warm on his shoulder, her words echoing in the quiet air. The adventure of his day had suddenly turned into something else, something he couldn't quite name, but it felt important. He had just gone for a walk, but he had found much more than he was looking for. Back at home, the boy didn't say much about what happened. At dinner, he told his father about finding the old woman and walking her back. His father nodded, a serious look on his face. "You did the right thing," he said, his voice full of quiet approval. "That's what you do." His mother added her own praise, her eyes warm. The boy felt good, but he also felt like the story was a small, private treasure. He didn't tell his friends at school. He worried they might laugh or make a joke about it, and that would somehow shrink the importance of it, make it feel ordinary, but for him, it wasn't ordinary. In bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he replayed it in his head. He thought about the worry in the old woman's eyes when he first saw her, and how that worry had melted away when she saw his house. He thought about the weight of her hand on his shoulder and the sure sound of her voice. "I will not forget this." The words stuck to him. He wondered about her grandson, and if the sage she'd been gathering made it to his ceremony. He hoped it had. Meanwhile, in a small house on the reservation, Winona was surrounded by her family. Her children and grandchildren had gathered, their faces tight with leftover worry. They fussed over her, making her tea, asking again and again if she was sure she was all right. She waved them off gently. "I am fine," she insisted. "A little tired. My feet are sore, but I am here." When everyone had settled, she told them the story. Not just the short version, but the whole of it. She described the disorienting moment when the land seemed to fold in on itself, the sun feeling suddenly too hot. Then she told them about the boy. She didn't just say he helped. She painted a picture with her words, slow and deliberate. She told them how he had appeared, not suddenly, but carefully, so as not to startle her. How his voice was respectful when he called her ma'am. How he didn't grab her arm or try to lead her like a child, but walked beside her, watching the path for her. He was not afraid, she said, looking around at her family. And he was not pretending. He did not see an old Indian woman lost on land that used to be ours. He saw a person, a grandmother who was tired and needed to get home. The room was quiet. Her family listened. They knew her words were not just a thank you. They were an observation, something deeper. The next day, Winona asked her eldest son to drive her to see an old friend, a man named Ben, who was respected in their community. Ben was sitting on his porch when they pulled up. Winona sat with him, sharing tobacco, and told the story again. Ben listened, his eyes closing sometimes as if to see it better. "This young boy," Ben said after a long silence. "His family, they are good people?" "They are," Winona's son said. "They have always been fair neighbors, quiet." Ben nodded. He looked at Winona. This was not just a kindness. This was a protection. He protected one of our elders. "That is a big thing. That is what I feel," Winona agreed. "The old way," Ben said, "is to give thanks. Not just a thank you and a handshake. A real thanks. A wapila. A wapila is more than gratitude. It is a ceremony, a giving back, a way to keep balance in the world. When someone does something important for you, you honor them. You show your thanks in a way that everyone can see, so the goodness is recognized and grows." Winona's eyes brightened. That was the feeling in her heart, the one she couldn't quite name. "Not just from me," she said. "From us, from the community. This boy, he showed our grandmother respect. He showed our family respect by bringing her to safety. So our family, our community, should thank him. It is a good lesson for the young ones to see." Ben agreed. He said he would speak to others. The idea began to move through the community, from house to house, like a soft wind. It was decided. They would prepare a proper wapila for the boy and his family, but such a thing is not done carelessly. A few days later, the boy's mother was in her kitchen when the phone rang. It was a formal, polite voice on the other end. He introduced himself as being from the tribal council. The mother's first instinct was worry. Had something happened? "No, no," the man said, his voice warm. "Quite the opposite. We are calling about your son and the help he gave to our elder, Winona." He explained, in careful, respectful terms, what the community wished to do. He called it a giving of thanks, a gathering to honor her son's good heart. He asked for the family's permission to visit their home on the coming Saturday afternoon. The mother was stunned. She held the phone tight, looking out the window where her son was tossing a ball for their dog. She thought of the quiet pride in his eyes since that day. "Well," she said, her voice catching a little, "that is incredibly kind. Of course. We would be honored." She hung up and called her husband in from the yard. She told him. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. A mix of emotions on their faces: surprise, humility, a touch of nervousness. They decided not to tell their son just yet. They wanted it to be a surprise, a good surprise. They simply told him that some friends from the reservation might come by on the weekend to say hello, to thank him properly. The boy just shrugged. "Okay," he said. He imagined maybe the old woman's grandson coming over, maybe shaking his hand. He thought that would be nice. He had no idea. He had no idea that his small act of walking beside an old woman had traveled so far, had become a story that touched a whole community. He had no idea that people were now gathering gifts, a star quilt being tied, jars of traditional berry sauce being prepared, a beautiful beaded knife sheath being finished by an auntie who was known for her fine work. He was just a boy who had done what he thought was right. And now, because of that, an entire community was quietly, purposefully, getting ready to come and tell him, in the loudest and most beautiful way they knew, that his right thing mattered. Saturday arrived with the sky so clear and blue, it looked like it went on forever. The boy spent his morning like he often did, doing his chores. His parents had been a little quiet, a little busy, but in a nice way. His mother had baked an extra pie that morning, apple, his favorite. When he asked why, she just smiled and said, "Just in case we have company." After lunch, his father asked him to split some kindling for the wood stove. "Good to have it ready," his father said, which seemed a little strange since it was still warm outside. But the boy didn't mind. He liked the physical work, the solid thunk of the axe hitting the block, the clean split of the wood. He was out in the front yard, lost in the rhythm of it. When he first heard the sound dot, it was a low rumble, not like thunder, but steady. He paused, axing midair, and listened. It was coming from the direction of the main road, the one that ran past the hill where he'd found the old woman. He lowered the axe and turned to look. Over the crest of the hill, a vehicle appeared. It was an older, well-kept sedan. Then, right behind it, another car. And then a pickup truck. And another. A line of them, moving slowly, like a parade no one had told him about. The boy stood frozen, the axe handle growing slick in his grip. The procession turned off the paved road onto the long gravel driveway that led to his house. The crunching of tires on gravel grew louder, mixing with the low hum of engines. Cars and trucks, more than he could quickly count, rolled to a stop along both sides of the driveway. Doors began to open. People got out. Men, women, teenagers, little kids holding their parents' hands. There were dozens of them. They were dressed simply jeans, t-shirts, summer dresses, but many of the men wore beautiful, brightly colored shirts with intricate ribbon patterns. And some of the women had long decorative shawls draped over their arms. There was a quiet hum of conversation, the soft closing of car doors. And at the center of it all, being helped carefully from the front sedan, was the old woman, Winona. Today, she didn't look lost or tired. She stood straight, her gray hair braided neatly. She held the arm of a young man, her grandson. Her eyes scanned the yard and found him. Still rooted to the spot by his pile of wood dot, the boy's heart was pounding in his ears. A wild thought shot through his mind. Asterisk, did I do something wrong? But the faces he saw weren't angry. They were serious, kind. Some even smiled shyly at him, Dot. His parents came out onto the porch then. He looked at them, his eyes wide with a silent question. His mother gave him a small, reassuring nod. His father stepped down into the yard, his own posture respectful and calm. They had known. This was the company. From the group, a middle-aged man stepped forward. He had a kind, lined face and long black hair tied back. He walked up to the boy's father and extended his hand. They shook. Then the man turned and looked at the boy. He didn't walk over, but his voice carried clearly in the quiet afternoon air. "Hello," the man said. "My name is Ben. We are here from the community. We are here because of what you did for our elder, Winona." He spoke slowly, clearly, making sure every word was heard. "You showed great kindness and respect. In our way, when someone does something so good, we do not just say thank you with words. We come together. We perform a wopila, a giving of thanks to honor you." The boy just stared. His mouth felt dry. A whole community. The words from a week ago echoed in his head. I will not forget this. She hadn't. And she hadn't come alone. Winona, with her grandson, began to walk slowly toward the porch. The crowd of people moved with her, forming a loose, wide circle in the family's front yard. The boy's mother gently touched his arm. Go on, she whispered. It's okay. He set the axe down carefully against the woodpile and walked over to stand next to his parents on the porch steps. He felt very small and very seen. Ben spoke again, addressing everyone now. We give thanks for this young man's good heart. We give thanks that our grandmother was safe. We give thanks for this meeting today and for the connection between our families and our communities. Then, an older woman began to sing. It was a Lakota song, a honoring song. Her voice was high and strong, not fancy, but full of feeling. It rose into the big sky. The boy didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling. It was gratitude. It was serious and beautiful. He saw some of the people in the circle bow their heads slightly, their eyes closed, listening. He looked at his parents. His mother had tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. His father stood tall, his hand resting firmly on the boy's shoulder. The song ended, leaving a peaceful silence filled only with the sound of the wind through the grass. Then, Winona's grandson stepped forward. He was a teenager, maybe 16 or 17. He looked a little nervous, but he walked right up to the boy. In his hands was a long, narrow object wrapped in soft cloth. He unwrapped it carefully. It was a knife sheath, but unlike any the boy had ever seen. It was made of heavy, golden brown leather, and covering it was the most beautiful beadwork he could imagine. Intricate patterns of blue, red, yellow, and white formed geometric shapes and lines that seemed to flow like rivers or mountains. It was stunning. My grandmother asked me to make this for you, the young man said, his voice earnest. She said to give it to the young man who helps others find their path. He held it out. For your knife, for when you are out on the land. The boy, almost in a daze, reached out and took it. The leather was smooth, the beads cool and perfect under his fingertips. Thank you, he managed to say, his own voice a squeak. The young man nodded, a quick, shy smile touching his lips, and stepped back. This was just the beginning. The gifts were not just for him, but for his whole family, for their home. A group of women came forward, unfolding a magnificent star quilt, its patterns bursting with color. They presented it to his parents, for warmth in your home. There were jars of dark, sweet berry sauce, and bags of fried bread, still warm. There were handmade dolls for the house, and a beautifully carved pipe for his father, offered with great respect. The boy held on to his beaded sheath, watching as his yard, his ordinary Saturday, was transformed into something he would never, ever forget. The serious feeling of the ceremony began to soften. The circle broke, and people started to move, to talk quietly. And then, the most amazing thing happened. A few boys, about his age, drifted away from their parents and hung back, looking at him. One of them pointed to the woodpile. You split all that yourself? He asked. The boy nodded. Want to see our fort? One of the other boys said, It's over by the creek. We could show you. And just like that, the towering, beautiful, overwhelming ceremony became something else too. It became about being a kid. He looked at his mother. She nodded, her eyes shining. He carefully set his precious gift on the porch steps and followed the boys, the sound of their sudden, easy laughter mixing with the voices of their families talking together in the yard. The laughter of the boys felt like a release, like opening a window in a quiet room. The younger kids, 3 of them, all from the visiting families, led him away from the crowd, past the woodpile and toward the old, gnarled cottonwood that marked the beginning of the creek path. The tall, serious boy who had given him the sheath watched them go, a small smile on his face, before turning back to talk with the boy's father Dot as they walked. The initial shyness melted away, chased off by simple questions. "Do you fish this creek?" one asked. "Ever find arrowheads?" said another. The boy answered, and soon he was asking his own questions. He learned their names, but they felt like secrets shared between them, not for the story. They were just boys now, not representatives of anything. They showed him their fort, which wasn't really a fort at all, but a perfect hidden spot under the bent branches of a willow tree by the water. It was clear they came here often. There was a flat stone for sitting, and a little stash of smooth rocks and old fishing line. "This is the best spot," one of them said proudly. "The grown-ups can't see you, but you can hear everything from the yard." And they could. The murmur of the adult voices drifted down to them, a soft, comforting sound mixed with the babble of the creek. From their hiding place, they could see glimpses of the colorful shirts and dresses, the slow movement of people talking in small groups. It was like watching a beautiful, quiet play from the best seat in the house. Back in the yard, something just as important was happening. The formal part of the Wapilla was over, but the purpose of it was deepening. The boy's mother had brought out the apple pie and some other simple things from the kitchen. But the visiting women had brought food too. They spread blankets on the grass and began unpacking containers. This wasn't a potluck like at school. This was a sharing. A woman with a kind face and quick hands unwrapped a large piece of canvas to reveal a pile of golden, puffy fry bread. The smell of it, warm and yeasty, filled the air. Another placed a big pot of something dark and sweet-smelling, wajapi, a berry sauce, right next to it. There were simple dishes of beans and corn. The boy's father, who was usually a man of few words, found himself standing with Ben and a few other men. They weren't talking about the weather. They were talking about the land, the lack of rain, the price of cattle, the deer that had been getting into gardens. It was the talk of neighbors who share the same sky and the same worries. There was a respect there, a recognition that they understood the same things, even if their lives were different. The boy's mother was sitting on the porch steps with Winona and a few other women. They were talking about children, about grandchildren, about how fast they grow. Winona reached out and touched the star quilt that lay folded beside them. "This pattern," she said softly to the boy's mother, "it tells a story of the morning star, a story of guidance." She didn't explain more, but she didn't need to. The meaning was in the gift itself. It was a wish for good things, for light in the home. After a while, someone called out, "Let's eat." The boys by the creek heard it and came tumbling back up the path, their faces flushed. The circle was no longer formal. People sat on porch steps, on blankets, on folding chairs that had been brought out from the house. Plates were passed around. The boy found himself sitting with his new friends, a plate in his lap. He tore off a piece of the fry bread, dipped it in the sweet wajapi, and took a bite. It was incredible. The combination of the warm, soft bread and the tart, cool berries was like nothing he'd ever tasted. He must have made a face, because the other boys giggled. "Good, right?" one said with his mouth full. The boy just nodded, taking another big bite. He watched as his father tried the fry bread, giving a firm, approving nod to the man who had made it. He saw his mother listen intently as an older woman showed her how to wrap the bread around the berries like a taco. There was laughter, the easy kind that comes when people are full of good food and good feelings. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, painting everything in gold, the atmosphere changed again. It wasn't time to go, not yet, but the energy settled into something warm and content. A few of the teenagers brought out a guitar and a small drum. They didn't play a big ceremonial song. They played something softer, a gentle melody that drifted through the yard. A few people hummed along. The boy, his belly full, leaned back on his elbows on the blanket. He looked around at all these people who had filled his quiet yard with color and sound and life. He looked at the old woman, Winona, who was now telling a story to a group of children, her hands moving in the air. He looked at his parents, who looked more relaxed and happy than he could remember. He thought about the knife sheath, which was sitting safely in his room. He thought about the walk from the cottonwood tree just over a week ago. That single small decision to walk forward and say, "Ma'am," had been like dropping a single pebble into a still pond. He had no idea that the ripples would spread this far, that they would touch this many people, and then bounce back to him. Surrounding him with all of this dot, it wasn't scary anymore. It wasn't overwhelming. It just felt right. It felt like a secret about the world that he had accidentally learned, that kindness isn't a small, quiet thing that disappears. It's a seed, and if you plant it with respect, sometimes, without you even expecting it, a whole community might come and help it grow into something taller and more beautiful than you could ever imagine. He didn't have these big words for it, of course. He just felt a deep, warm happiness sitting there in the grass, listening to the soft music, surrounded by his family and by all these new friends. The golden light of the late afternoon began to soften, turning the sky a gentle shade of orange and pink. The music from the guitar had faded, and the yard was filled with the quiet, comfortable sounds of people who were no longer guests or hosts, but simply people together. Dishes were being gathered, but slowly, with no rush dot. The boy watched as his mother and one of the visiting women stood by the picnic blankets, talking softly as they stacked empty plates. They weren't just saying polite things. They were leaning in, smiling at something one of them had said. It looked like the beginning of a friendship. He saw his father walking with Ben and a couple of the other men toward the fence line. His father was pointing at something in the distance, maybe explaining about the pasture or the water line. The men listened, nodding. They looked like they were making plans, not for today, but for some other day. It was a good feeling. Winona was sitting in a comfortable chair that had been brought out for her. She was tired. The boy could see that. The long day had taken her energy, but her face was peaceful. Her grandson stood behind her, his hands resting on the back of her chair. She caught the boy's eye from across the yard and gave him a slow, deep nod. It wasn't a wave. It was something more solid, an acknowledgement that passed between them without any words. He nodded back, feeling a strange, grown-up understanding pass between them. Then people started moving toward their cars. But it wasn't like a party ending. It was slower, more deliberate. There were no quick goodbyes shouted from car windows. Instead, people came to the porch, to where the boy stood with his parents. They didn't shake hands. They offered hugs. The women hugged his mother tightly, saying things like, "We'll see you soon, and thank you for having us in your home." The men clasped his father's hand, but then they would pull him in, patting his back. "You have a good boy," one man said, his voice gruff with emotion. "A good family." When it was time for Winona to leave, her grandson helped her up. She walked slowly to the boy. She didn't hug him, but she reached out and took both of his hands in hers. Her hands were thin and cool, but her grip was strong. She looked into his eyes, and he saw that same deep calm he had seen when she first thanked him in his kitchen. "You walk a good path," she said, her voice clear and firm. "Keep your eyes open and your heart open. The land remembers kindness." She squeezed his hands once and then let go, allowing her grandson to lead her carefully to the waiting car. One by one, the cars started, their headlights cutting through the dimming light. They turned around in the yard and made their way back down the long driveway, kicking up little clouds of dust that glowed in the sunset. The boy and his parents stood on the porch, waving until the last taillight disappeared over the hill. Silence settled back over the yard. But it was a different kind of silence than before. It wasn't empty. It was full. The grass was slightly flattened where blankets and people had been. The air still carried the faint, sweet smell of fry bread and berries. The star quilt was folded neatly on the porch swing. It was a quiet that hummed with memory. They didn't go inside right away. The three of them just stood there for a few minutes, listening to the crickets start their evening song. Finally, his father let out a long, slow breath. "Well," he said, "that was something." His mother put her arm around the boy's shoulders, pulling him close. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He leaned into her side. "Yeah," he said. And he was more than okay. He felt like he had grown 3 years in one afternoon. It was big. His father chuckled. "That's one word for it." They went inside as the stars began to prick through the deep blue sky. The house felt cozy, familiar, but also a little changed. The beautiful quilt was brought in and laid over the back of the sofa, its bright colors transforming the room. The jars of wasabi were lined up on the kitchen counter like precious gems. The boy went to his room. His beaded knife sheath was on his dresser. He picked it up, running his fingers over the intricate patterns again in the quiet. He thought of the boy who made it for him. He thought of the other boys by the creek. He knew, with a certainty that felt brand new, that he would see them again. This wasn't an ending, and he was right. A few weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail, addressed to the family. It was a formal invitation, decorated with beautiful artwork, to the annual community powwow on the reservation. They were listed as honored guests. They all went. It was a whirlwind of color, drumming, dancing, and more food. The boy found his friends there, and they ran through the crowds together, sharing snow cones. He saw Winona, who was sitting with the elders, and she smiled her slow, deep smile at him got in the years that followed. The connection didn't fade. It became a part of their lives. The boy's family was invited to other gatherings, a graduation, a wedding. Sometimes, people from the reservation would just stop by if they were passing, to say hello, to drop off some fresh fish or a new batch of fry bread. The boy and the grandson who had given him the sheath became real friends, fishing together, learning from each other. The story of that Saturday became a legend in both communities, but a quiet one. It wasn't shouted. It was told when someone needed an example of what it means to be a good neighbor. It was told to children to show them that a simple act of help can build a bridge that lasts a lifetime. The boy grew up. He never forgot that day. He kept the knife sheath all his life, a reminder not of what he did, but of what can happen when you see a person, not a stranger. He learned that gratitude isn't always a quiet thank you. Sometimes it's a whole community showing up at your door, filling your yard with song and color, and weaving your family's story into theirs. He learned that the most important paths aren't the ones you walk alone, but the ones you find by walking beside someone else, even for just a little while. And he always remembered the weight of an old woman's hand on his shoulder, and the words that started it all. "I will not forget this." Neither would he.